Oh, okay. Again, welcome to our second colloquium speech. Before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to make sure all of you who would like to get this credit, you need to attend 4 out of 5 speeches, and make sure you sign your name before you leave. Okay. All right. So let me officially introduce today's speaker. Okay. It's really my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Deng from Microsoft Research. Okay. Lee got his PhD degree from University of Wisconsin, Madison in '89. After that, he joined the University of Waterloo in Canada. For 10 years, he went through all these promotion stages, assistant, associate, and full professor. Then he decided to make more money, so he joined Microsoft, okay? Right?
I didn't write that here.
Okay. I thought that's my interpretation, okay. Since then, he has been in Microsoft Research, making a lot of contribution. So he was awarded the Technology Transfer and Achievement Award from Microsoft. Most impressively, Lee also involved in a lot of IEEE services. He just finished his term as IEEE Signal Processing Magazine editor-in-chief. That magazine was ranked #1 out of all the 127 IEEE publications in terms of the impact factor. Okay. So that's a very impressive record. Okay. And of course, all these come with a lot of very prestigious title, like IEEE Fellow. He's also a Fellow of the Acoustical Society of America and also International Speech Communication Society Fellow. So today he's going to give us a very interesting talk and a very advanced research topic in deep architecture. So let's welcome Lee.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen, for your kind introduction. So he told me that I need to speak very technically today. Okay, so that's what I prepared for. So I'll talk about this deep architecture. This is the research that many people in the field have been called in various names. One of the names is a 3rd generation neural network. Some people say that. And then a lot of people in machine learning also get into this area. And some people, some of the publications you see in artificial intelligence also deal with this issue. And the contributions are coming from various communities, including computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural network, and signal processing. Actually, it's one of the major community that actually make a fair large amount of contribution to this deep learning. So deep learning refers to a set of techniques that actually simulate brain-like architecture in terms of processing information in a nonlinear manner, in a layer-by-layer fashion. And the applications of deep learning in terms of, it's actually in 2 areas. One major area is in unsupervised learning. That means you learn the data from various sources without the label. Therefore, you can capture their correlation, their properties. And then the most important application of deep learning actually is in classification and recognition. So people have applied that technique for recognition, speech, and now we are thinking about doing some more advanced speech application and also computer vision, etc. So today, it's kind of overview. I'm going to give you a general flavor of this field, starting roughly around 2006. I'll give you a little bit history about this area of research. So the outline for today is, first of all, give some background, which I just gave. And I actually, this talk actually is kind of condensed version of one of the tutorial I gave a few months ago in China, Asian Pacific conference. I got about 4 hours tutorial, so I condensed them all into somewhere around 1 hour. So some of the slides may actually, hopefully they will be still coherent, okay? So in reviewing a whole bunch of architectures around, I think mostly those architectures are published after 2006. I actually I did some homework to try to categorize a whole bunch of architectures in terms of three categories. And I think it's a quite reasonable way of, and of course, each category has subcategories, so I'm not going to go through all the detail. And then after I give you some general overview of these architectures, I will talk a little bit about some application for each of the categories. So in organizing this talk, I try to pick some typical application, one or two out of each of the categories. I may not be able to go through all those, so I'll see how much time we have over here. And then I will show you some of the future directions and some unresolved issues that people are concerned about in this area. And our various groups in Microsoft research have been very actively involved in this area of research. I think in the summer, we already interviewed a whole bunch of intern candidates in this area. So first of all, in terms of background, I give you some base. Is that too small for you? If it's too small, I'm not going to read that in through detail. Maybe just give you some outline of what this concept is. So deep learning, sometimes people call the hierarchical learning, a whole bunch of names, different names. Refers to, as I just mentioned, layer by layer information transformation, and typically involve nonlinearity. If there's no nonlinearity, when you get many layers, at the end it's still it's a linear architecture. So you get nonlinear by nonlinear, layer by layer learning, and at the end of the learning, you come up with something that you hope can actually capture the essence of the information that you want to process. And exactly how to do it requires some very elaborate architecture, which is the main theme of this talk. Okay, so that's actually the general definition. Now, this is one that's called DBN, deep belief network. And many of you who are in machine learning may also be very familiar with the dynamic Bayesian network. So one of the tutorial questions that I ask at the end of 4 hours is to ask the student to answer what the difference between two versions of DBN. And those people actually who keep track of their attention, during the talk, they're actually able to answer. So I'm going to give you, and maybe I'll give you some story as to why, the second DBN, they want to call it DBN. And then, so this is very important. This is the very first architecture that got published that attracted a lot of attention. So now our various, our group at Microsoft started applying this, and also with a lot of modifications, applying that for very large vocabulary speech recognition. We got a very, very, very strong success. And I think Google and IBM, they follow this kind of work. They also get similar kind of success. I'm going to show you all the one single summary of the slides so you can see how good it is. And to understand this DBN, we have to go down somewhere to talk a little bit about this restricted Boltzmann machine, which is not something that is very familiar to many signal processing people. So I will spend a little bit of time going over this. And then I will talk about what's called the deep neural network. And one of the things I feel it's important to have a good tutorial in this area is that in the literature, if you read the literature, you actually can see that most of the papers, including the inventor of DBN, they actually use these two terms exchangeably, which sometimes causes a lot of confusion. If you understand it, it doesn't matter. For those people, for the new students who actually read the literature, they get very confused. They say, well, is it this or this? Sometimes they exchange from each other. So I'll give you a little history about how this confusion comes about and how to resolve that confusion. We're actually writing a tutorial now, try to make all this terminology standard. And then there's a particular type of architecture called the deep autoencoder that also is extremely important architecture in this deep learning literature. And then I talk, at the end, I might have some time to talk a little about some newer work. So we call it stacking network and tensor network. Brian from UW here actually helped us, and then we worked on both of this last summer. So hopefully we'll have more good students to come to work with us in the summer. So first of all, as a background, I just show you that this area is fairly popular, and it comes from several communities, including machine learning, neural network, artificial intelligence, and signal processing, etc. That can be actually witnessed by a number of recent workshops and some dedicated symposiums and special issues dedicated to this, exclusively to this issue. And in particular, for those of you who are doing speech-related research, we just come up with this new transaction in this speech and language processing transaction that actually has the whole full issue of this. And that issue contains like 5 or 6 articles that describes how this deep architecture, particularly the DBN architecture, has been successfully applied to small vocabulary and large vocabulary speech recognition. Very, very successful. And also this PAMI transaction also has this special issue. They actually somehow, and I never work on I actually never worked on computer vision seriously in the past. They asked me to help them to organize this, so I'm actually part of this. So the call for paper, for those of you who are working in this area, call for paper is at the end of April, and they intend to have the special issue out at the end of this month, at the end of this year. So you can see that from computer vision community, and from signal processing community, and from speech processing community, and all these various communities actually are involved, and they actually try to understand this deep learning, deep architecture better. So, okay, so I'm talking about, so this is the workshop that I helped with, that started our Microsoft research in applying deep learning in speech recognition. So I'll show you, but for those of you who go to NIPS, you know that at the end of a workshop, they usually host a banquet, right? At the very last day, and then for each bank, so each organizer, each set of organizers are supposed to give some summary presentation, and the instruction is that it's supposed to be humorous. It's supposed to be, you know, not that technical, and then you should keep some memory for the audience. So this is the presentation. So this is the workshop, and this workshop contains some very important papers. It's got preliminary papers that was before, you know, they were able to submit to them. And that actually shows the very first promise that speech recognition can benefit from deep architecture. So this is the summary presentation I gave. It's a little bit, so that's called the, so the workshop organizer called that to be a speech workshop, right? So that's fine. And then we actually present this speechless summary presentation. So everybody is supposed to present about 3 or 4 minutes, you know, maybe 2 to 3 minutes presentation. So this is our presentation. Okay, so that's our Microsoft, and this is kind of Toronto group, and they actually pioneer this kind of area. That's it. So he said he's because it's deeper, and they say, and then Toronto people say that, wow. Okay, they can recognize phone name. They present some very nice result in that workshop. And then we say, well, and then they ask what kind of things do you need? And then we say, we want to recognize noisy sentences by all kinds of speakers. And they say, well, maybe we work together. And then a lot of work was done since then. So, so yeah, I'm talking specifically about Professor Jeff Hinton, and we actually organized this workshop together, and that's it. And so we finished that, and then the organizer of the workshop said that, wow, this is a really nice speechless presentation on the speech workshop. But anyway, and then this is the fun stuff I show you. So Jeff, he just sent email to me just a few days ago. So let me see. So there are two, so this is the list from dictionary.com, right? So every now and then, they actually, you type in acronym there, they actually rank how popular it is. And then he just sent it to me that now deep belief network is more popular than dynamic Bayes network. Kind of funny. And then he told me that, well, actually, I'm going to give a tutorial at ICAST in April. And he says, oh, make sure that before you go there, you should check this again. Maybe the other one will go up there. But this is a lot more popular. I have been grown up in this kind of dynamic Bayes network. A lot of work I have done for this. And then I'm going to show you some of the, I might have some result to show that. So we try both. And this is so much better than this. There are some reasons why. Actually, mathematically, there's a deep connection between the two, but they're not quite the same. And so once I go through this, I'm actually going to show you exactly how different kind of techniques. So they even have something called data bus network. That's also called DBN. Anyway, So that's just the fun. Okay, so now I'm going to finish this background material. So I will actually go into to the technical detail about what kind of architectures that we have seen, the major ones. I mean, there are a lot of minor ones which I may not even know about. So major ones that I know about in the literature since 2006 about, so I categorize them into three ways. One is a generative architecture, and this is actually the major one. The major motivation for doing deep learning is really coming from this unsupervised learning. So what generative architecture simply means that, so those information processing architecture in terms of layer by layer construction, their aim is to characterize the data correlation or join the static distribution between the data and labels. So this is the kind of generative model that many people in machine learning talk about. And typically people, I mean, if you are actually specialized in this machine learning, you might be indoctrinated by this saying that if you do discrimination, you don't really care about generation because your goal is this one. That's SVM's concept. As it turns out that if you take that into account, it can do a lot better. But you have to do a lot more work. Right? So the data has to be more reasonable. And then it turned out that the deep learning architecture, this has actually turned out to be something that probably is most useful. You can do hybrid between the two. So if you do hybrid between the two, you actually turn out to get a lot more better result than just doing this, a discriminative approach. But there are some discriminative, some deep architectures that are purely discriminative, including some of the things that we are doing. And it's just much simpler to do. And this is a lot harder to do. But if you do it right, you can do a lot better. And then the best thing is to combine them to do this. Right. So this discriminative architecture is aimed at characterizing procedural distribution of the Clark condition, or just like standard machine learning architectures. Except now it does so using layer by layer kind of brain-like architecture. So actually, most of the successful applications that we have in our lab actually is in this category. And that actually, so I'm going to give you a list of the examples for those. That includes quite a number of work done, including the work done at UW here. So for example, some product network that is, so far as I know, is purely generative in nature. Professor Domingo here at UW actually, and his students have done very nice work in this area. An energy-based model, an autoencoder. So anything that has this ball is something that I'm going to spend a little bit more time to go through. And dynamic Bayesian network, if you structure them in such a way that you have many, layer by layer architecture, you actually, they actually belong to this deep architecture. So a lot of very nice work done here at UW. Actually, they have this very nice Bayesian network done here. And then the discriminative deep architecture would include conditional random field structured in terms of layer by layer. So we actually have a piece of work done in our lab. And then when we compare this with this, we actually get a huge difference in terms of performance. So we quickly switched to doing this. That was a few years ago. And also, for those of you who are familiar with speech recognition, neural network-based speech recognition, the current trend is what's called the tandem artificial neural network. They actually belong to this discriminative deep architecture. It actually uses the neural network, it could be shallow neural network, to produce some of the features. And the features get enhanced in different stages. And at the end, they fit that into HML. And that's a very, very different way than what I'm going to talk about. So this is what that belongs to this class, and the performance is not nearly as good at all. So I have some slides later on to show you. The recurrent neural network also belongs to this category. Actually, the recurrent network can be used in both. So in the literature, if you go to the literature, you can see that some recurrent network has been done in a very, very nice way of generating text, character strings or the word strings. Very, very nice. And that is used in this, that belongs to this. But if you actually put the label information as the prediction is the output, you actually get something that belongs to this one. So some of the architecture can be done in both, depending on how you structure them. And then the hybrid deep architecture is something something that that actually has achieved the most success in speech recognition in terms of having DBN, that is the deep belief network, as the what's called the pre-training stage, where you actually use all the generative power to get all this. But once you do that, you use it to initialize the deep network that would otherwise need to be initialized in other ways. Typically people use the random numbers to initialize, and that the result is very, very bad. So I'm going to actually show you some comparison between how the initialization using this can do much better than just using conventional way of doing initialization. Okay, so this is the big summary, overall summary. So I'm going to go to the each of specific examples in detail, which I'm mostly familiar with, and some of the work that I have been involved in doing. So first of all, I show you a deep autoencoder, and that actually is a very typical example of generative model, and that's we actually have this publication over here. So the whole idea of deep autoencoder is as follows. It's like a neural network. Right? So if you look at this, look at a neural network. Except you have many layers. Well, I show you 3 layers. And if you put the output to be identical to the input, like speech or image, you actually can have the middle layer here to be the code that represents this. Okay? You know what I'm saying? So it's coding. So in our work, so we did that a few years ago, about 2 years ago. We actually put the speech spectrogram here. So it's a big window, like 9 to 11 frames. So we code directly the Fourier transform. So this is perfect for EE people, right? Fourier transform. Actually, you could do that in the capture, but in terms of coding, the original one is a lot better. So 256 Fourier coefficient for each frame, and you get about 10 frames roughly. So you get about how many numbers? You get about 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 numbers, real numbers. Now in this framework, the code here is on we use around 312. 300 binary numbers that code this whole thing. And then, of course, you code this, essentially just frame by frame. At the end, you use the overlap and add to put them all together. So I'm going to show you the result. But in the old days, if you were to do this kind of work about 5-6 years ago, you will actually initialize this random number, and then you do backpropagation. And then if you do this, the result is horrible. Why do that? And I got 10 times more errors than the way that I use deep learning technique. So the deep learning essentially is use the RBM. I'm going to say a few words about RBM, restricted problem machine. You learn it in a special way, which I'll talk about in a few slides. And then you use this one to initialize the weights. And then you do transportation, transposition of what you get over here, up over here, you initialize them, and then you do backpropagation, you get just a much better result. So the reason why I call this architecture to be generative model essentially is because there's no label involved. All this code is doing is to represent information in this raw data in an abstract way. And the way this is powerful can be shown that when you reconstruct the data, you can compute the errors, distortion errors, and can see how good this is compared with the standard vector quantization. So this is so let me skip through here, and this is the result I'm going to show you. So this is the original speech spectrogram, and this is I think people in our lab, Mike. He's very good research. He actually developed this vector quantization technique to code this using the same 300 bits for each of the slides, big slides So you can see that so this is a reconstructed spectrogram using vector quantization technique to code. So the conversion rate is exactly the same as the neural network that I mentioned. You can see that this is it captures most of the things, right? So you compress the data by about 2 orders of magnitude, roughly. Now you lose some of the details here. So this is a deep autoencoder that has exactly the same bits as this. You can see that a lot of details are captured. Some more important details are captured. And if you look at this, is plots the error, coding error here. So if you can see, so you can see here. So this is the code. The red the red here is the coding error as a function of the frame using autoencoder. And the blue is the same kind of error with the same number of bits obtained by doing vector quantization. You can see that. So this is the error distributed in terms of time and frequency. The red is much bigger in terms of errors for vector quantization compared with the autoencoder. Okay. Yeah, so this is one example. So these are the quantitative results that I show. For different, this is the VQ, the error is about 7 bits of dB, is error. And then for this autoencoder, and actually dBn is the one that doesn't involve any special fine tuning. Right? So you can see that with or without particular kind of fine tuning, you actually can get much lower error compared with the standard vector quantization. And actually, the difference between this is very similar to the image coding that was originally published in the Science paper. So I kind of skipped the history of this deep learning. So the technique we talk about actually started. Actually, was published in the Science paper in 2006 by Professor Jeff Hinton from Toronto University with his student. And in that paper, they show this deep autoencoder on the binary image data. And they show that the same kind of gain. And they turned out to be roughly about 2 dB gain using autoencoder with the it's a PCA that was claimed to be one of the best of the coding scheme. And then now, and then we actually got Jeff. So we worked together with Jeff when he came to our lab. So the first thing we apply, deep learning was to say, well, we'll forget about image to begin with, and the speech. So why don't we do the speech? And for doing the speech, you need to do a lot more work. So for example, the speech data, has special kind of distribution. So we need to use the real value of dBn. So we actually modify all the previous architecture, so that it fit into. The first time we tried that, it's horrible. It's just horrible. And I thought that something goes wrong. And then we had, we worked for a while, and then we actually get some really nice result. And of course, once you do that, there are a lot of things you can do, right? So once you get a code, this code can go into HMM as a feature extraction to do recognition. And we tried that, and we got reasonable success, but not nearly as much success as something else I'm going to tell you. And then once you have this, you can do lots of other things, like for information retrieval. And then for the text retrieval, I think the Toronto team actually used this code for, not for speech, but for the document. And once you have that thing, since this is all binary, they can do the hashing to make extremely fast retrieval of the document. And all these results are published in this just beautiful set of the diagram you can see in the Science paper in 2006. Okay, so I'm done with the autoencoder. So now the next part of the presentation is going to be on this RBM and how, well, I show you a little bit RBM. So RBM, and this is a very important architecture that allows you to do deep learning layer by layer. And that accounts for a big part of the success of speech recognition. So for many of you who may not know much about this Boltzmann machine, I'll give you a very quick overview of this RBM. So essentially, you get the data, input data called visible. This is like observation data, and this is the hidden layer. So Boltzmann machine differs from the standard neural network, like multi-layer perceptron, in the sense that it has up and down. Connection is up and down. It's a graphical model. Right? It's a special case of Markov random field. So the reason why it's called restricted is because we restrict the connection between the hidden layers themselves, and so we eliminate the connection. We also, so this architecture also eliminates the connection between the visible. Otherwise, just the learning becomes so much difficult. So, and there are some other reasons why the restriction here is important. So the connection between hidden layer and the visible layer are bidirectional. And once you have that, then the learning is not trivial. So actually, the Toronto group, the initial learning for this Boltzmann machine was actually invented in 1986. But the learning is so slow, I mean, nobody used it. So in 2006, the Toronto group, just by, well, according to the inventor, he said, well, just by accident, he actually he said that, well, you don't have to have so many iterations, or maybe it's just running, so tired of running all the program. In theory, you really have to run the whole, multicolor simulation keep sampling. Ideally you should run forever, and then you take whatever you get through this running, and then you use that statistic to update the weights. This is a rigorous way of doing this, the maximum likelihood to estimate. And then he just said, well, why don't we just do one iteration rather than infinite? Right? Well, typically, I mean, you do it, you probably get a few hundred, and then you collect. It's very slow. And then he found that with one iteration, it just does almost as good. And although all the theory is broken, right? And then he got quite a number of PhD students writing thesis, trying to justify why it worked. And there's some reasonable theory involved. So I'm not going to go through all this, except to let you know that it's not until quite recently the learning of this become very, very efficient. So we have all the codes of doing all this. But there are a lot of tricks you need to do. So he actually wrote this practical guide of how to train this in his website after we asked him to do it. So anyway, so this is the basic building block. But this is not deep architecture. This is shallow. Right? It's a one single layer. So you go up and down and going up and down, and that's it. So once you do that, you actually can use this one to code this. Because when you learn the weight, your objective function is to, ideally, it should be likelihood of the data, right? In such a way that reconstruction has the highest fidelity. So therefore, you try not to lose information over here. And therefore, whatever you get here is useful. It can be a good representation of this data. So it makes sense. So one of the a set of nice properties of RBM is that once you train them, you actually can prove that, well, this is not obvious. I mean, for the people who work on this area, they always say, it's very, so the first time I heard this talk, and I always thought it's obvious. So when I go back to try to derive, it's not obvious. But anyway, so this is the property. So in other words, after you learn all the weights, W, you actually can do the inference to compute in the setup of the restricted Boltzmann machine. You can compute the conditional probability of the hidden layer given all the data vector in terms of just sigmoid function of this. So the inference for the probability, hidden probability, in terms of operation, it's just like multi-layer perception when you do forward pass. But when you do conventional neural network, you won't be able to go down, right? But the nice thing about this restricted Boltzmann machine is that you actually can go down as well. So if you want to generate binary data in the image, or you generate speech data using what's called the Gaussian version of the restricted Boltzmann machine, you actually can do generation. And this is something very, very different than the conventional hidden Markov model that, the conventional multi-layer perception that most of the people in our community knows about. So, and then just to, if something something is not obvious for you, right, you always do some work. Right? So we actually did this derivation. Well, the derivation actually is around there. So we actually in the paper we just published, we actually put this derivation in it. So at least people in our community is able to go through. It's not obvious. Right? So when you want to compute the conditional probability of the hidden activity given the observation, you actually go through the definition in terms of energy function. And then there are some tricks over here. You have to do, sort of hidden Markov model. You have to do to factorize them in the right way. And at the end, it turned out that it just happened to have sigmoid function here. So for those students who want to pass your qualified exam in this area, you really should read this derivation to make sure that you understand it. Yeah. And then once you verify a few of them, you probably can trust all the things those people are saying. Okay, so now I'm talking about how to use, well, actually, I just finished talking about the RBM, so you trust me that RBM can be very efficiently learned, and they have very, very nice property. You can do inference, you can do data generation, or using a very, very simple, just one single step, calculation. Either they are similar to conventional neural network, or they are similar to Gaussian computation. Now, once you do that, what's the big deal of RBM? So the reason why RBM is interesting is because it can be used as the building block to build a deeper architecture. And that's how RBM become useful. So the way they do it is called what's called a layer by layer training. So the input can be image, speech, text, documents, or whatever you want to do. So we actually try to apply this one to many, many tasks. For like 80% of tasks, it work well. And there are some tasks it doesn't work well, and we're trying to understand why. So this is a fairly generic technique. So once you actually put your input into the RBM, you actually can compute the hidden activity using the sigmoid computation, the one I just showed you. But once you do that, the posterior probability of the hidden activity given the input actually can be used as a new feature, because it kind of summarizes whatever in the original data, and then you fit it into another RBM. It can build up the architecture. That's called a layer-by-layer training. Or sometimes people call it greedy layer, or so greedy learning or whatever. And then once you do that, it seems to be very heuristic, right? You just extract layer by layer, and then it turned out that there are quite a number of interesting proofs provided. The proof is a little bit complicated, but you have to you read the original paper and some of the papers that get some tutorial articles published afterwards. So it can be proved that each time we add another layer of the features of RBM, you can improve the variational lower bound on the log probability of the training data. So that's a very nice property, but that's not the bound. And then I heard, I myself haven't done it before. I heard that this bound is not very, it's pretty loose bound. Right? If its bound is very loose, then it really doesn't serve any purpose. So a lot of people in the machine learning actually still consider this the technique for learning to be hacked. Right? To me, it is, but there is a reasonable. So far, the success is mainly empirical. So for those of you who are actually inclined into theoretical research, I think there are a lot of huge space that actually can be explored. So I'm continuing on with this DBN. So the DBN can be done in many different ways. So when you build up layer by layer learning using RBM, you actually construct the DBN. So the DBN essentially is so for each connection, it's bidirectional. Right? Now, once you do that, you actually can do generative. You can generate data. After you learn all this, you can generate data directly from the top layer. So suppose you can. Let me do something. Okay, so let me do this. Okay, so suppose you can have part of this. The hidden layer to be some of the label. Okay, so label can be treated as data in terms of this mathematical construction. And then after you learn all this, according to the technique that I just mentioned, you actually can set some of the labels to be one to represent digit 1 or maybe for the speech. So once you do that, you can just run the same kind of simulation after it gets equilibrium, and then you can use this to generate the data. And the data you generate is fairly amazing. The first time I heard this, I said, gosh, that's not too bad, right? So this is the result that I borrowed from Professor Hinton. He actually used this DBN architecture to train the digit, handwriting digit images. And after it's learning, then they throw away all the data, and then all you get is a set of weights, right? Several layers of weights. I think he used 5 layers in his experiment. And then once you do that, then you set one particular digit to be 1, everything else to be 0. So for example, 0. So well, maybe here, it said 5 bits. The bit in the label unit corresponding 5 to be 1, everything else to be 0. And then you just run this simulation. You actually get something like this at the bottom layer. It's very nice. And then you choose. You run the same thing different time, you get different kind of variations. Well, you know why? That's exactly what people are writing, right? Every time you write, the first time you write this, the second time it's not identical to this. So so actually I gave this tutorial a few months ago in China, and then there are a few very well-known speech synthesis companies. They're sitting there. And they said, gosh, that's nice. Right? They said, in our product, as a matter of fact, in most of the speech synthesis technology, if you're doing speech synthesis, every time you set the text there, you want that to generate speech. Right? It's basically a hidden Markov model. It's identical. There's no variation. And that's not what human talk, right? You talk the same thing twice, you get a different variation. But that may just be due to the specific way that speech synthesis technique is carried out for hidden Markov model-based speech synthesis. So this is very nice. So not only this deep learning gives you the reasonable output, but it also gives you reasonable variation as well. But I think when I look at something goes wrong here, right? And it may not be wrong. People sometimes, because some of the training data may have something looking like this, right? So it looks like this is so this could be 3, right? It looks 3. So there are some errors here, and this 8 may or may not be the right one. But this is at least it's kind of generated directly from the set of weights rather than after you learn the whole bunch of weights from the data. So, and if you are talking about, so one of the things I actually I would like to point out here is that if you are talking about neural network in terms of the multi-layer perceptron, you never be able to do anything like this. Whereas when you have this deep belief network, you actually can do both ways. So this is the generative direction for deep network. Now, how do you do recognition? You can actually do recognition as well. So very often people immediately ask the question, when I give this tutorial, people ask, well, this is a generative model, how do you use it how do you do that? How do you use the model to do generation? And then the very simple answer is you look at how hidden Markov model as a generative model do recognition. Right? So very simple. All you have to do is that for different of the label set, you treat the label as part of data. I just mentioned to you. Okay, for label, you treat the data simply you code them to be 0 and 1 or different ways of coding. And then you do the same kind of learning as I talked about earlier. So when you do that, then when you want to do recognition, you want to do the synthesis, all you do is that you set this pattern fixed, and then you fix certain pattern 0, 1, and then you do multi-color simulation. Whatever comes down here will be your generated data. Right? Now for recognition, the way you do it is as follows. You actually set the same pattern here, and then of course in this case, you actually pass the information back here because this is bidirectional. And then you do multi-color simulation. And from that process, you actually can compute the likelihood of the data. And then you compare which likelihood is the highest. That becomes your, your recognition result, right? It's very simple. It's exactly the same way as a hidden Markov model, generative model. So generative model can be used for recognition, and that's a well-known fact. And unfortunately, if you do this for speech, we try, it doesn't work well. And the reason why it doesn't work well, it's understood as well, because it's just like it's in hidden Markov model. If you're purely using generative model to do recognition, you don't get much discrimination. Right? You do discrimination. Well, if your model is very, very good, faithful representation of your underlying data process, then maximum likelihood learning without discrimination can do well. But in practice, none of the model is perfect. Right? The natural data is very, is much more complex than any model possibly can describe. And of course, for that reason, just using DBN as a general model in the literal sense to do recognition typically doesn't give you a lot of gain. It doesn't do better than hidden Markov model. We try. Now, so this is the process of doing recognition. So for those people who are versed in speech recognition, think about using generative model doing recognition in the same way as hidden Markov model generative doing recognition, and then you can very well understand this. But if you hear people from neural network people talking about this, you get the first time I get confused. How do you treat the label as part of data? And it's very confusing. It's a generative model. That means you don't have a label. But once you think that in terms of hidden Markov, everything becomes clear. Okay, so I'm all done with the generative model. So next step, I just finished this part. I'm talking about hybrid. Okay. So the next set of slides talk about hybrid architecture. So the hybrid architecture, I'm going to go quick. So it goes as follows. So this is the DBN learning, right? So okay, so let me start again. So this is the RBM, and then after you do this, you get sigmoid function. You actually get posterior probability of hidden activity given the training set, and then you treat it as if it's V again. Then you beat another one, keep going. The more data you have, the more layer you can do, the bigger you can get, the better result you can get. So that's actually the experience that we have in our lab. Now, the final layer, you treat that as a label. Okay, like for speech recognition, you put them as HMM states, or maybe you put them as a phoneme, or maybe word, or whatever. For image recognition, you put them to be the label for whatever object you want to have. You code them. Now, once you do that, that's kind of DBN, right? It's pretty much like DBN. Now, once you, as I mentioned to you earlier, DBN really doesn't do well in terms of generative model. Then all you do is that so this is something really, really hacky. So I still don't like it, but you just work wonderfully well. So after you do all this, I talked to you about earlier, you just forget about all the probability. So you treat this weight to be just multi-layer perceptron weights. And then you use that to initialize multi-layer perceptron. It looks like multi-layer perceptron if you forget about bidirectional connection. And you use that as an initial set of weights to do backpropagation back all the way from here down here. You don't have to do a lot of backpropagation. Reasonable. I mean, in our lab, we do about how many? 12 iterations, 10 iterations, rather than 100 iterations as in the past. Because you get a very good weight already coming from generative model. And then once you do this, you get really, really good result. And how good it is, you're going to see in a moment, okay? Okay, this is very hacky. So a lot of people in machine learning object to this kind of approach, partly because there's not very good justification for what I'm doing here. Actually, it turned out that using this RBM weights, we can use that for other kind of architecture I'm going to show you. We also got similar kind of good gain. So, so there are a few PhD theses that I read. One actually typical one is coming from University of Montreal, from Dangerous Group. And they actually performed extensive research as to why this weight coming from DBN is so effective. They actually have two hypotheses, and there's some experimental evidence to show those. So it turned out that one hypothesis is that this kind of set weight gives you a very nice initial points in the optimization space, because you're looking about this number of weights here. In our system, we get about how many? 20 million set of weights. Big, deep, right? Very big. And there's just no way you can initialize them well to begin with. If you use the random initialization, when the backpropagation gradient propagate all the way from top down to here, the gradient become almost zero, right? So you won't be able to learn anything. The lower weight you have, the more difficult it is to learn. That's kind of learn. And that's why most of the people doing neural network research typically limit themselves into just one hidden layer, because in that case, that weight is not too bad. But if you build up the deep architecture, which it's useful, for whatever task you have, then when you backpropagate your error down here, there's just not enough learning signal here. So you can't learn that very much. Now, if you use the generative model, DBN, to initialize them, you already get some reasonably good weight over here. So it just slightly adjust this. Actually, most of the backpropagation algorithm that run after the DBN initial, sometimes people call it pre-training, it actually typically just the weight up here, not much down here. It's the same problem here, because the algorithm backpropagation essentially, is the gradient. When you hit gradient, you get the sigma, 1 minus sigma, remember? And then the lower you go, the more, when the units actually saturate between 0 and 1, when you take derivative, the product between of the typically becomes 0. The lower you go, the more likely you get a 0. You just don't get any of the learning signal. And then once you use this generative model to do it, you actually turn out you are able to fix the initialization point into reasonable good space to do it. Well, there's another hypothesis that was also verified experimentally that actually shows that this pre-training by DBN essentially give you a good regularization mechanism. And they have some experiment to show that. Now, so now the next question is, what is DBN? So deep neural network, like 5 years ago, people would say deep neural network will be the standard of multi-layer perceptron, right? And then with many layers. That's still true, except that now, from maybe last year on, if you read the literature talking about DNN, deep neural network, that essentially implies what I call the hybrid architecture, where the initialization is done by DBN as a generative model, and then the fine-tuning, there's another step called the fine-tuning, which is the standard backpropagation, is done likely in the same way as the second generation neural network. So that's why I call it a hybrid model. And this turned out to be the most effective so far. It's a lot better than the DBN, the original DBN's learning in terms of generative model. Okay, so now, of course, once you do this kind of learning, you only get the static pattern recognition, right? You have to, for speech, you won't be able to, this one won't do well for speech. You can do phoneme recognition, frame-based phoneme recognition. For each frame, you can do how much, and then it turned out that this actually just works so much better than our conventional Gaussian mixture model. And if you use this, if you want to use this one to do continuous speech recognition, you have to do something about the sequence problem. So the simplest way of doing that is just doing the hidden Markov model, right? So we do that. So we just put them all together, and that becomes the architecture to do it. Well, there are better ways of doing that. So we are going to explore just purely deep learning way of doing sequence, and that would be a lot better than hidden Markov model. But so far, the best result, the simplest way of implementing this deep neural network into speech recognition is to do hidden Markov model. So my colleagues, Deng and a number of other Microsoft research colleagues actually have been working very hard to make it work very well for the large vocabulary speech recognition. And the same kind of result have been kind of duplicated by other companies. So this is the hidden Markov model in terms of, and this is the deep neural network, and they are tied together. So this, in a way, it's kind of convolutional in a way. So we don't actually change the weight here as a function of time. If you do that, it's hopeless. But just the weight itself for large vocabulary will get about 20-some million weights. You just can't afford to do all this. So we tie all the weight together. It's kind of time invariant deep network. The only time varying property is done at the hidden Markov level. So once you do that, then the posterior probability, well, to do that, you have to fit the output of layer into what's called the softmax. Right? You turn that into posterior probability, and then use the base rule to turn that into, to have data probability. Right? And you can do all these little tricks. Once you do that, you just replace the Gaussian mixture model probability by the deep neural network probability, and then you run the same kind of, similar kind of decoding in hidden Markov model, which you don't. Well, yeah, we have to change a little bit of this, and then you can see how good the result is. So this is the result that I'm going to show you. So let me show you. For the timid, there's some story here. So I have time to go through it. So if we use this DNN, we actually get the timid significantly better than the hidden Markov model system. And then for the voice search, that's the work that we did with our intern. About 2 years ago, 2010, George Dahl from Toronto, and he came over to work with us. So for the standard HMM, roughly about 60%. Now, if you use DNN with the triphone context-dependent model, it jumped from 60-some% to 72%. Now, so we are at Microsoft Research. We work with Microsoft Research in Asia, French side, and also my colleague Deng. They actually did some comprehensive experiments on switchboard data with 300 hours of the data. And the best system that we got for this data is about using discriminant training, all the best things that we have is about 75%. And then once we use that DNN, the one I show you, it jumped 85%. And so we published that in various papers. Now here I want to show you, and this is the result coming from Google. And they were able to get about 2,000 hours of data. And I think we also get some similar kind of data. I'm not going to talk about the result. And the result, it's a bit minor. It's a minor gain here. And our result is much better than this. And they also tried the YouTube data, about 14 hours in the training. And the result, they also get some gain here. So those are all their state-of-the-art system here. And they all publish all this. And then the broadcast news data, IBM tried that as well, using 50 hours of training. And they haven't got much gain so far. And yesterday, actually, our group, the paper was just published about 1 month ago in ASRU. So yesterday we actually studied in our group, we study literature study reading group. So we found that there are 5 things they did wrong, according to what they wrote in the paper. So there are a lot of techniques of doing this. And I think last year in the Johns Hopkins workshop, there was a group trying to do this. So it turned out that they bought the wrong hosting machine there. So I heard that. I think that the heat is so. When doing all this, you need to have very big, very powerful machine to do it. Typically, you require the GPU, parallel computing to do it. They bought the wrong one. I heard that the heat actually burned them out or something like that. So so we just invested a fair amount of money to get all this, to do all this stuff last time. And Google people certainly know how to do it. Yeah. Okay, good. So I'm going to. Okay, so I may not have much time to go through here. How much time do I have? 5 minutes? 3 minutes? 5 minutes? 3 minutes? Okay, so I'll quickly go through. So I'm talking about discriminant architecture. So this is the architecture that overcome all the problems with the DNA. So despite the fact that you get all this, you need a large machine. You have to make sure it doesn't burn things. It doesn't, you probably need to have good, in our lab, we have one lab, when the intern come over here, it's really hot in summer. It does all, but anyway, so it takes a lot of computation. The most important problem with this architecture, the one I show you, that's very successful, is that it cannot do parallel computing. This is the way that the algorithm, do backpropagation, you just can't do it. We spent all effort to try to do it. We even get Jeff Hinton to come here to consult with it again, the second time. And after all this exploration, we said, well, give up. You just have to, get the most powerful machine and then run that 24 hours. The more you run, the better you get. But it's very hard, right? If you get an infinite amount of training set, you can do it. So the next set of architecture I'm going to quickly go through here is to aim to solve that problem. Good, quick. So this is the newest architecture that Brian worked with last year. Okay, so let me try to wrap up since I have. So I'll skip all this. So show you the final result, okay? And that's it. So this is this part of the work. So I call that deep stacking network. This is the tensor version of stacking network. Now for this image task, we actually get much better than this DBN. So we're very happy about this. It took me a while to get a result. Now for Timmy, it's slightly better. Well, not much better than this. So we're still working on this. And then, now for the frame level phone classification, which is perfectly suited for this kind of deep network without doing HMM. So I think the interface between HMM and this deep network may screw up some of the experiment. We're still investigating on this. If you're just looking at the frame level classification, we actually get a lot better result for this, doing this than all the previous one. And the hidden Markov, using Gaussian mixture model, you don't get much more than 72% because you do frame by frame. Well, you don't constrain them in terms of, you don't say that, this segment of the frame belong to, the same phone. Right? So this is very noisy. Right? So you don't get a very good result. And then using this technique, we do a lot better. So this is a very fairly significant gain. Now for speech understanding, we just, it took me about 2 days to do speech understanding. We have our colleagues from Silicon Valley, Gohan Tur, he's an expert in speech understanding. And we actually wrote the paper together, it took me 2 days. He prepared all the data, he got this boosting, he got a really nice result. So I actually modify my program, I just put the data without, I don't even know what the data looks like. So when I run that experiment, and run, typically the fourth try, we actually get better result than the best they have got here. So it turned out that this has a good, we haven't done anything for DBN. We probably should try that to see whether this is comparable to all this. So this actually is not only parallelizable, you can actually, now once we have that, you can put it in the cloud to do it. Or the cloud, actually just the data center, you can split up in the CPU to do it. Whereas doing this, so far, you have to use a GPU. If you don't use GPU, it takes 3 years just to run all the experiments that we talked about earlier. Think about this matrix multiplication. Every time you multiply, you get thousands by thousands multiplication. And occasionally you have to do inverse. It's just very expensive, so people keep the machine running. But doing this, cloud computer can actually, run them all together. So let me quickly go through all this. So application, so unresolved issue here. So people actually talk about exactly how, this is really just a lot of theoretical problem here. Right? So why is it that hierarchical system can intrinsically do better than the flat system? And it's not clear. Right? And a lot of people, from biology, argue that brain architecture actually require you to do information processing. And there's some theoretical work now, if you read into the literature, to show that in terms of the overfitting properties, the deep architecture is essentially just much more amenable to fight against the overfitting. If you have a lot of data, think about it. If you have very deep architecture, and then whatever you learned in the past, it's not going to contribute to the overfitting. Right? So there are very efficient way of using deep architecture to represent your features. And also, and this is also a big question that people keep asking, is to what extent should we design our deep model that are inspired by biological systems? I think this is an extremely important issue to investigate. Okay, so that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Can we have about 2 quick questions?
Yeah.
Any question? Maybe I can ask a quick one. Okay. Seems to me the traditional way of like multi-layer perceptron, basically we set the architecture, right? So we just forward. Then after the learning, after so much propagation, and after learning all the weights are there, then in terms of recognition, we just do once, right? And we will get the final encoded labels, and then we know which class. Yeah. But in your case, seems to me, you try to, even doing the labeling, doing the recognition, you also try to iterate between the data space and also the label space.
Correct. So but that's the DBN, using generative model to do recognition.
Right.
Now, it turned out that the whole point I was talking about later on when I talk about hybrid model is to say that you can forget about doing this. Just use the weight that you learn in that model to put them directly into the multi-layer perceptron. That's what we call DNA, to initialize them, and then do backpropagation lightly, not as much as in the past. And do the same thing as the neural network, you can do much better.
Okay.
And this is one of the important message.
Okay.
From empirical viewpoint, right? Not from theoretical viewpoint. Many people in machine learning have objection to it.
Okay. But in terms of so much computation involved, compared to today's hidden Markov model, which is pretty fast, how are we going to eventually deal with that kind of computational power if we are talking about more and more portable devices and mobile devices?
Yeah. That's cloud computing.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the solution, and that's one of the reasons we do this stacking model. Right? So for DBN, I think you train them, but training, actually, the recognition isn't too bad. Recognition is the same as standard neural network. It's just training is very expensive.
Okay.
So I think even so NVIDIA will be very good a company to say all this stuff if everybody's doing this. So the learning is the bottleneck so far. So we actually, so in the paper we just wrote, which just appeared this month in the transaction, actually give you the detailed comparison in terms of the computation complexity in the learning phase and also in the decoding phase. It turned out for decoding phase, in some cases, it's even lower than hidden Markov model.
Okay.
Because for hidden Markov system, you have to do Gaussian computation for mixture computation. Right. And that is replaced by just forward pass in one shot. So it depends on how big it is, it's comparable.
Do we have any more questions from audience?
So anybody understand the difference between DBN versus the other DBN? Yeah, I didn't talk about that. Yeah, so they're very different because that DBN I talk about, deep belief network, has the bidirectional connection at the top. And then has unidirectional, they're both graphical models. Right? They are just structured different way. And dynamic Bayesian network has everything in one direction. And also dynamic there refers to the temporal time, whereas the DBN, that deep, doesn't refer to time. It refers to the layer. So you can have deep DBN, that the other DBN is the Bayesian network. And then you have this temporal span as well as kind of spatial span as well. So once you understand the essence of this, they're all part of just different kind of graphical model. Until you go to deep neural network, they become the separate thing. Right? Yeah.
Okay. So if no more questions, let's give Lee another big hand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.